Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cognitively CRE. Hey, I'm pretty proud to have an exceptional guest join us today. And what we're going to do is conversationally take a look at trends that are affecting workplace, corporate real estate. We're going to dive deep into what could be the new norm, the next norm in the workplace. And with that, I would like to introduce Albert to the show. Hello, Albert.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, truly. To help the audience get a better sense for where you're coming from, can you give us a little sense for who you are, what your background is?
Sure. I'll give you I'll give you the economy tour on this. I started out as a management consultant. Worked as a management consultant for about 6 or 7 years, and I thought long and hard about how I can work harder and make less money. So I got into design. That's what took me there. But no, what really interested me about design was that I was interested in solving business problems using a design thinking methodology. So I've worked for Gensler, I've worked for DGW, I've worked for AECOM, and now I work for a firm called Unispace, which is a strategy, design, and construction firm.
Very nice. For those of you who don't know, I'm James Waddell. I'm the host and co-speaker today. Again, very conversational today. Joining us live on the right-hand side, live via YouTube on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a comment section. We are monitoring those comments and questions. If you have a comment or question, feel free to ask, and we'll bring it into the conversation as appropriate. Also, if you're watching this from a recorded session, if you go all the way to the end, you'll see a URL that will take you to a landing page. For more information there, you can ask your questions, and those questions will go directly to us, and we will offer our insights. With that, let me get things started. Albert. I think a good way to get this started is really talk about this notion that there's two camps. There's a camp that's waiting for everything to get back to normal, and there's another camp that knows something has changed. And ultimately, the question becomes, is the office dead? So insights on that. Is the office dead?
I hope not, because I'd be out of a job if it were. But I do think the office is shifting, and I think probably everybody who's listening to this understands that and actually it's interesting, James. I've evolved my position on this. When we all went into shelter in place back in March, I kind of felt that once things got back to normal, or at least once we kind of in other words, once the pandemic wasn't necessarily an issue, we would go back to normal, and we would go back to the way we used to work. I based that thinking on what we did after the GFC. During the Great Financial Crisis, everyone was talking about, this is going to change how much commercial real estate we take. This is going to affect the way we work. The reality is, after the GFC, 2 years later, there was more commercial real estate leased than ever before. So I tempered my response in how things were going to change and how they were going to evolve. And again, I've changed my stance on that probably back in April and May, when I realized that this pandemic has significantly changed the way we think about work and where work is done. But to answer your question about whether or not the office is dead, I think it's changing. And the one way I think it's changing is this: clients I talk to are approaching it in 3 different ways. One, hey, about 30%, we might have about 30% fewer employees coming back into the office. So let's just cut our real estate portfolio by 30% and we're done. That's easy math. The problem with that is I think it's a little bit short-sighted, because you don't know if the remaining 70% that remains is actually going to support the shifting workforce trends and habits. So I think it's not only is it a matter of generating efficiencies, but then with your leftover real estate, or the real estate that you want to hold on to, how do you enable it to actually perform the way it can or should to support almost a new emerging workforce with new habits and new work practices?
Let me pull this up. I think it supports sort of exactly what you're saying. You guys went through a fairly in-depth research phase at Unispace, right?
Yeah. Unispace was actually a little bit late into coming into our recommendations for a post-COVID work environment, simply because we wanted, we didn't want to do anything rash. We didn't want to put solutions out there that were more fashionable than necessarily that had substance to it. And so what we did is we realized, and for those who are listening in or watching, and who have ever done a workplace utilization exercise. What that basically is, it's somebody walking around the office and counting how often butts are in seats, or how many people are in conference rooms. What we get out of that exercise is we understand how well or how poorly the office is being occupied or utilized. Pre-COVID numbers, any given office space, and James, this is across all market sectors, about 30 to 40% of any given office space is unoccupied or unutilized. That's not necessarily an unhealthy number. It's just what we're seeing as far as metrics. Now, the interesting part, though, is if you take a look at what we're seeing from return to work metrics, one thing that has remained consistent since April is about 40% of the employee population still wants to retain some semblance of remote working. And that semblance about 2 to 3 days a week. They want to, even if there's a vaccine tomorrow, they still want to work from home or want to work remotely 2 to 3 days a week. Now, if you take that one metric I talked about, that the workplace is typically unoccupied 30 to 40%, and you add the remote working metric, the reality is, and I think what scares the hell out of real estate leaders, is that your CFO might walk into any given workspace and it's unoccupied 80% of the time, or it might be unoccupied 80%. And so, just to be kind of provocative, we say the office is becoming irrelevant. But we don't quite think that.
I was going to say, is it though, or is it what we do in the office becoming irrelevant? In other words, is it a difference in thinking between post-COVID and pre-COVID that dictates what the office really is?
No, you're absolutely right on that. And what we've done is we've taken a big philosophical shift on how we think about space and how we program space. That's no longer based on what we call work modes, but based on what we call an outcomes, a work environment that generates outcomes as opposed to supporting work practice. Thank you for bringing this up, James. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Is if you hired, whether it's Unispace or JLL or Gensler or whomever, basically the way that we would program a space is we'd figure out how often teams focus, teams collaborate, teams socialize, and teams learn, and then allocate the commensurate spaces to support those work modes. So in other words, James, if you and your team were focused in, we would do ethnographic exercises, we would do utilization studies, we would do surveys, and let's say came back and said, James's team does or engages in focus work about 40% of the time. Then we would allocate 40% of the space to workstations or day offices or phone rooms or what have you to support that focus work. What we realized here, James, is that all of those work modes are being effectively completed or effectively engaged in at home right now because we've had to, right? And in some cases, people prefer to do their focus work at home, whether it's formatting spreadsheets or writing emails. They'd rather do that at home or somewhere else than maybe go into the office, especially if they have a long commute. So we quickly realized that the office is no longer really about supporting work modes or work behaviors, but it should be more outcomes based. And what we mean by outcomes based is 3 things: problem solving, innovation, and community. And James, we didn't just kind of pick those out of the ether or randomly or arbitrarily. In our studies and in our research, what began to emerge is that those were the three outcomes that can't be easily or can't be effectively replicated on a virtual platform. In other words, problem solving, innovation, and community building is tough to do when everybody's online or everybody's working remotely. So we took a look at what was not working from a remote perspective and then placed emphasis on that, transferred what's not working back into the workspace so that we give meaning and incentive and purpose to the office again.
Yeah, let me interrupt for a second because I had a thought. I was thinking about this the other day. It's just my thought. I haven't communicated it before openly. This is the first time. Could it be that these functions, innovation in particular, are difficult to do in a virtual world because so much of the communication from a human perspective is done non-verbally. It's body language, it's intuited as to the feelings of the individual that you have. And also this missing sort of spark when you're not together and co-creating in real life. Is that some of the things that you're seeing or turned up in some of the research that you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't think I'm revealing anything sort of incredibly insightful when I say that people miss that interaction. It's body language. It's the idea to sort of riff off, your fellow employees to actually get to that brainstorming sort of ethos. And just one example is, we try to almost recreate happy hours online, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, in my opinion, it's for the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, it's a little bit awkward until somebody has their second drink. But it's kind of hard to replicate that sort of organic interaction between people that I think ultimately is an intangible value. It's hard to put a value on it, but when it's not, in other words, when we take that brainstorming piece offline, or at least we do it remotely, there's something there that just doesn't exist as it does when it's face to face. Now, I will say, I will provide one caveat to that, James, is one interesting thing about COVID is that, I've been advocating for remote working and flexible working for the last 15 years. And typically when I talk to clients about it, they say, well, that's fine for maybe, the Googles or the Facebooks, but that's not our culture. What's interesting about this is that, previously I tried to edge them towards the remote working pool, but they never jumped in. COVID has forced everybody into the pool, and now they realize that they can swim. So I think what's happening is that people are understanding that they can effectively do some work at home or some work remotely, but perhaps that human connection and that human interaction piece, and especially when we're talking about that community building piece, is I think it's hard to evolve and maintain and reinforce culture online unless, and this was my caveat, unless you're a company like WordPress, or even like GitHub that was born in a distributed model, right? In other words, they were never pushed into the pool; they were always in the pool.
Yeah, it's so many questions come to mind when you say that, right? Certainly, there are companies that are digital natives, and there's workers that are digital natives too, so they understand how to work in a digital environment. And there's others that would prefer to be in a space. Maybe they're an older generational worker. I think what we're saying is there's probably always going to be an opportunity for folks to be in the office, collaborating and communicating with those folks who are working from home. Is it fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So that kind of leads me to this next slide a little bit, in that there's a connection between the digital workplace, if you will, the analog workplace, and what that means from a design perspective or from a process perspective. Are customers starting to think about that? And if the space is different and people are working from home, what is that for them?
Yeah, this is, I love to talk to this slide because it was, I think, incredibly prescient at the time. Because we did a consortium here in the Bay. I live in San Francisco, and we did a consortium with technology firms and professional services firms. And James, I was asked the dreaded question of, Albert, what is the workplace of the future? And so what we did is, instead of trying to answer that, we kind of flipped the script a little bit and said, hold on, in order to answer that question, let's really figure out who are going to be the occupants of the workplace of the future and what their needs are and what their work habits are. So we did a little bit of research, and we realized that by about 2025, half of all tech companies, the employee profile for tech companies by 2025 will be Gen Y and Gen Z. And professional services catches up in around 2027, 2028. Now, what's interesting about that is we further did research around, what were their online habits. And we affectionately call these guys and gals digital natives, Gen Y and Gen Zers. And what we found out was that either for professional reasons or for personal reasons, digital natives spend about 8 to 9 hours online each day. And so that's what really sparked the philosophical shift on how we think about space. Because previously, like I said, we would always program or we would always do a workplace strategy based on those 4 work modes. What we realized in actually doing a study on the demographics of the employees of the future is that all those activities, all those work modes were collapsing onto the computer screen. In other words, the digital natives were doing all of that digitally, virtually, or online. Now, obviously, James, what we could not have predicted is that COVID was going to hit, and now we're all doing those things on the computer screen, and we're all doing it at home.
Right. You know, I guess it begs the question, so I think it's a good time to ask it. So knowing the things that we just talked about, what happens to our corporate real estate portfolio? Do I need more space, less space? I mean, it sounds like I need to change the space that I have to be effective. What does that look like?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think maybe 2 points here, James. You know, as you and I were talking through the intro of this, you were going to ask me what my superpower was, and I'm afraid I don't have one. But what I would really like right now is a crystal ball, because that's what clients are asking for. And in the absence of having a crystal ball, I think what we're seeing is a couple of things. Is A, yes, the workplace is changing, or the workplace needs to shift, but it really depends on region, and it really depends on market sector. For example, I'm seeing life sciences and e-commerce really blow up right now in terms of needing more space because they need more employees. In some instances, like you see Dropbox, you see Facebook, you see Google, are experimenting, or at least encouraging a remote working policy. But in doing so, they're rethinking the typology of their current workspaces. So again, maybe I'm sorry, James. So what I was going to say is, so again, I think I do think there's an opportunity here to be bold. I think organizations have about 6 to 9 months to really think about what their move is from a real estate perspective. And really, when I say make a move on a real estate perspective, what I mean by that is, you know, what are the business objectives? Have they changed? What are the organizational imperatives? And how is a a real estate portfolio going to support that? And I think what you're going to see is some market sectors are expanding, but I think what you're really going to see is a desire by most organizations to make their real estate or their workplace more efficient, which means saving space, but at the same time more effective.
Yeah, man, what a segue. More effective.
Whatever that means, right?
No, well, yeah. So it in terms of sort of our view of the world from a cognitive perspective, when we think of the workplace, and not to speak ill, but it was a defective from a technology perspective. I think a lot of folks, particularly when we think back on the controls from an AV room perspective, from a conference room perspective, a lot of the things were difficult to use, especially now that we're home and we're using technology that's consumer-based technology that's very easy to use. Like if you have a Samsung phone, Samsung TV, you can do a screen projection presentation in a second. So the question then becomes, why is it not that easy to do in the office?
Right.
So that's sort of one of the trends that's been accelerated. The other trend that's been accelerated, and it was a study, and I apologize, I'm trying to remember the study who accomplished and published a study. But recently it was published, done in the UK. 86% of the respondents said that they, as the employee, would determine when they go back to the office, not their employer. So logically, that means that even if they're told to go back to the office, they may choose not to and just go somewhere else to work. So the office has to be a place that people want to come to, right? And from a technology perspective, that means a lot of different things. Enterprise technology IT people have been looking at ways to reinforce worker productivity, the right type of laptop, the right type of application, faster access to databases. They haven't necessarily been looking at what makes a workplace more humanistic. How do I make it better and more efficient? And we would define that terms as being something that helps people get work done, not something that they have to learn how to use to get work done. So there's a notion of autonomous workplace and a number of other things that are out there that come to mind. But yeah, I think so too. I think when you change the space plan, when you change the purpose of the office, you also change the technology that goes in it. But I think a lot of that depends on the vertical that it's in too. I know you touched on it a little bit, but is there any other insights related to what verticals are doing? Maybe law firms versus high tech companies that come to mind?
Yeah, I think obviously law firms are typically very conservative. But interestingly enough, you say that, James, because we actually conducted. We didn't conduct the survey, but we were asked to analyze the survey results for a very large global law firm. And basically one of their questions is how often do you want to work from home, and what kind of space do you want when you come back to the workplace? And guess what the results were? The attorney said they want to work from home 2 to 3 days a week, but when they're back in the office, they want to make sure they have their own dedicated space.
Oh, sure.
Right? And actually, in answering your question in terms of market sectors, I think conservative market sectors like legal, some professional service firms, but even there, when you're talking about finance or even investment or private equity, I think you're seeing that a lot of that work is being done remotely rather effectively. I think again that universally people are thinking about coming back into the office, and we're calling this almost. I know we were talking about Propeller, but Propeller, the Propeller model is almost a proxy for a destination workplace, right? Mm-hmm. And figuring out what is it about the workplace that's going to draw people back in, and that's an interesting conversation, because now, especially in the tech industry, it used to be free food or services or your dry cleaning. Mm-hmm. But if you're working remotely, what are the amenities and services that are going to draw people back into the office and want to come back into the office? So I think that's an interesting question that firms or organizations are wrestling with.
Yeah, I see a comment or a question, a statement, I guess, for us to discuss. It's from Marga. I'm going to put it on the screen here. Hang on, just 1 second. So they're working on considering reducing the space and creating a hot desking system to make sure that you have a space to work when you're there. How does that? Oh, by the way, hi, Marga. Nice to meet you.
Looks like Marga's a runner.
I think so. So thank you for that comment. So Albert,
yeah.
I guess we do need, logically it would fall that we need some place to land to do some focus work if we're in the office to do some collaboration, right? Is it a hub and spoke model that we need to think about? And do we need to get into that detail? Or these new offices for collaboration and innovation, will they automatically have spaces that can check out for focus?
Yeah, so it might be, James, do we have that one?
I do, yeah. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah. Okay, and hopefully I'll be able to, maybe the one before this, James?
Oh, yep, no worries. Hang on just 1 second.
But here, what I'll say to this is to generate space efficiencies in the office, you basically have two strategic levers you can pull. One is going to, as Marga said, a hot desking scenario, which, in that sort of strategy, what you figure out is, well, let's say for every 10 people, you have 6 seats available, right? That's one way to generate those efficiencies, especially if you have people coming into the office 2 to 3 days a week. They probably don't need their own dedicated desk. The other kind of strategic lever you can pull is going from more cellular space to more sort of collaborative and open space. The private offices typically are rather inefficient unless they're used for teaming areas and or collaborative or meeting rooms. But when you think about how you can generate efficiencies, those are the two main levers: is creating sharing ratios for your workstations or your work points, and also converting more cellular spaces into open spaces that can be used for multifunctional purposes.
I'm going to hop in. I'm sorry for the interruption. So I don't know if this is the right slide, but certainly this is where my head went in hearing you discuss this. I know you guys have put some time into this predictive modeling for the the types of zone, the size of zones, and based on the type of work that goes into that. But it's also based on some real-time data, right? And some industry averages. And I thought that would be excellent to bring into the conversation as well.
Yeah, sure. Let me, I'm going to be bold here, James, try to share my screen.
Let's good luck with that. I have somewhat of a floor plan. Let me try to bring that up a little bit.
No, let me share my screen real quick, and then maybe take a look at the floor plan.
So this is a true conversational presentation, folks, as you can see. So we like to work on the fly here.
Yeah, bloopers included, right?
Hang on just one second. There we go, sir.
Yeah. So James, so what we did here is we partnered with a boutique real estate analytical firm, and what we did is we created a predictive analytics model. And what this does is it helps determine, or helps us give us a bit of a baseline on what pre-COVID occupancy rates were and what potential post-COVID occupancy rates will be. And the way we did that is this firm we worked with has millions of data points around badge data. We also fortified the data set with our utilization studies and some of our own research. And then what we did was we provided this predictive analytics firm, with return to work surveys. We took the very best research that was coming out of Gartner, out of McKinsey, out of Harvard Business Journal, and started to create a database of anticipated return to work rates per market sector. And I'll show you what this looks like. I'll just do a quick demo here. So what we can do is we can pick a market sector, and it can be anything from financial all the way down to technology. Let's do technology. And let's say that we're talking about a headquarters of, let's say, 1,500 people. And so what you see here is we consulted with the Department of Labor and Bureau of Labor and Statistics to figure out, well, in any given market sector, what teams or what departments comprise that office space, or what teams would actually be occupying that workspace. So based on the advice they gave us, a technology firm of about 1,500 people, about 28% would be business operations and occupations. And quite frankly, James, that's a fancy way of saying management and leadership. 51% would be professional and related occupations. And basically what that would be for technology would be your engineers, your program managers, your project managers, your R&D, let's say. Then 14% would be office administrative, sales, and so forth. Now, we work with clients. If these percentages actually don't correspond to the organization that we're working with, we can certainly override it. But just for now, for the sake of this example, what we see here is our predictive model is saying this. In the technology sector, aggregated across multiple companies, 1,500, let's say this is a headquarters, what we're seeing is about pre-COVID, 77% of employees were coming into work. At post-COVID, that's tracking more like 55%. And as we go down the continuum here of working from home and however many days they are, you finally get down to working from home full time. What we saw in the technology sector is about 3% pre-COVID. That's going to spike up to about 9% post-COVID. Now, where this really has impact at scale, James, is that prior, if this organization hired us to do a workplace strategy initiative, we'd probably be considering or programming for about whatever that is, 1,200 or 1,155 people. Post-COVID, we're now programming for about 821. And I'll show you how that has an impact on it. James, maybe if you want to bring back that one slide.
Yep, here we go.
I'll stop sharing screen.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, perfect. So what you James, what we did here is we actually took a client through that predictive analytics exercise. We entered in their own information, and what it came back as is pre-COVID, they were in the office about 80% full-time. Post-COVID, we're looking at about 60% full-time. Then we segmented the teams that are actually going to be working in that facility, and it turned out to be R&D, support, and sales. We tracked their current headcount, And this firm actually happens to be, this organization happens to be growing right now. And we captured their projected headcount and the likely percentage that they would be coming into the office, right? Now, based on that, we harnessed that data and funneled it into a kind of a high-level program that allowed us to then figure out that, you know what, if we're talking about that innovation zone, we probably want one collaborative space per 10 people. And by collaborative space, that could be anything, James. That could be a maker space, it could be a huddle room, it could be a project room, it could be anything. But because that innovation space is teaming and brainstorming and socializing ideas, we'd probably only program it 50 people, excuse me, one focus area for every 50 people and one learning area for every 40 people. Now going down to the next zone, we see problem solving. Remember, this is where you're going to be doing your introspective work. This is where we want you to get into that flow state that is a little bit hard to get into when you're trying to take care of a sick kid or feed a dog. So what we're thinking there is for every 25 people, you have maybe one focus zone, and that could be anything, James. That could be a quiet car, that could be a library, or that could be a farm table with the etiquette that there's no technology or no cell phone usage in that space, right? And because this is more concentrated and introspective, the collaboration ratio was 1 to 40 people. And then also that community zone piece, you'll see how those metrics kind of translated into a programming ratio there.
Yeah, when I see this, and by the way, I almost had a Joe Biden moment. There's a fly flying around in here. So if you guys can keep an eye on that, let me know. When I saw this, I was thinking, and this had been happening for a while, what I was thinking, it's technology, perhaps incorrect technology being deployed in these spaces, got a major impact on the success of these spaces. So one of the things that we've been thinking about as Cognitive is in defining the workplace experience, not necessarily just from an occupant perspective in the relationship to space, but also the technology. Is the technology being utilized? Is it effective? Is it optimized for the environment that it's in and the type of work that's trying to be done? And I think that becomes also a very important topic, maybe even very early on when you're thinking about budgetary perspective and what's an optimized office space look like. You really do have to start peeling that onion and getting into the fact that you can't do what you did in the past. You can't just sort of bring in some technology, AV technology or other technology that you've used in the past. You can. But you need to ask yourself, is that optimized for what we're trying to get done, right? What's the innovation that we can do in these spaces? And again, it all goes back to people vote with their feet. So how are you making this an easy to use space? And how do you know what you've deployed is effective in that time frame for what the work that's trying to be done at that time? You need data for that, right? It all goes back to data, digitalization.
So James, I'm going to give you a softball question here. When should a client engage the technology consultant?
Well, that was a softball. Thank you. As early as possible. No,
exactly.
In all reality, I get it. From a C-suite perspective, there's lots of conversations about what can we do, what should we do. There's budgeting, there's CFOs involved, there's folks like yourselves and JLLs that are helping them understand geographically where they need to be. But it does get into a conversation about workplace strategy at some point. So now that we've sort of defined it from a financial perspective, what happens in the space? And I think at that point, the wheels start to come off the bus from a technology perspective if we don't have these meaningful, innovative conversations about innovation as we're putting the workplace strategy plan together. I mean, we've been in this industry for a very, very long time. And I've done lots and lots of projects, small and large scale projects. And in some projects, what we found is when technology gets brought in at the CD phase or very early, this is construction document phase, or very late in the design development phase, it's a locked in budget. And you're just told, here's some money, do what you can with it. And yeah, you get some AV stuff and you get some technology put in the space, and yeah, it probably works. But is it optimized? I mean, is that really what you want to do for $250 or $300 per square foot of investment? Do you want it to just kind of work, or do you want it to be fully optimized for the most pleasant experience and the most productive experience of occupants? So there's the backing of that statement as early as it really is as early as possible, because it has such significant impact on what your occupants will feel. And there's also this notion, I think it's a good time to bring it up, and this has been happening for a while as well, that there are newer systems that don't really fit into enterprise IT or facilities. When we start thinking about occupant utilization sensors and platforms, and we start thinking about voice technology, voice recognition, and things of those nature, if you go to your enterprise IT department, they haven't focused on that, and they probably haven't done a lot of research on that because it's outside their core mission at the moment. Facilities is focused on the building, building systems, and it's left the corporate real estate executive, that persona, a little bit kind of on their own. How do they view that technology, and who can they talk to? And a little bit salesy here, but that was the part of the innovation and the reason Cognitive was born. It was to fill that role that was really missing in the industry. But let me kind of turn the question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to follow up that question, because one of the questions we get a lot, both around workplace and technology, is how do you filter, what's fashionable and what's trendy with what an organization really needs in terms of technology. And I'll give you a perfect example. About 5 or 6 years ago, I attended the CES show and the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, and the most innovative business application there at the time was 3D TVs for conference rooms. Right? Everyone thought that was going to be the next the hot ticket item, and obviously none of us are wearing glasses and and experiencing conferencing or doing conference calls in 3D. But was wondering what kind of advice you can provide myself or clients around how do you filter, or how do you discriminate between something that might be trendy or fashion, something that's actually has application for the business?
There's a litmus test for innovation, and it's true across the spectrum, whether it's technology related or not. And the first question to ask yourself, and that's a great question, really, is this a vitamin or is it a painkiller? Right. And I got this from our research with Stanford Rebuild. That was the litmus test that they have. So if you think about a vitamin, you take a vitamin every day and you might be able to miss it a week or two, maybe even a month, but it might be doing you some good in the long term. A painkiller, if you missed your painkiller, you're in pain. So from a technology perspective and the systems that are out there and the innovation that you see, you really need to bring it back into the workplace strategy and what your real estate or workplace is attempting to achieve. Now, in this case, we know that the next normal is going to be around innovation and collaboration. So what is the innovation that supports that notion from a cultural perspective for our business? So we know what the pain's going to be. The pain's going to be if I deploy the old technology the way I have in the past in this new space, I'm probably going to have a disconnect between the physical world in the office and the digital world, which are those remote workers. So how do I solve that, right, in a way that is meaningful to everyone and I'm not overspending? There's also the notion of a fast fail, right? So we have to do pilots. Those pilots have to test the notion of innovation or the meaning of innovation in context of the workers who are using it. Right? So the workers, again, they'll vote with their feet. People use technology they find value in, and they'll let you know that they find value in. So right now, given the absolute disruption that the markets have had, the corporate real estate market has had, I think now's the right time to sort of dissect some of that, right? I mean, from an enterprise IT perspective, let's just start thinking differently about how we interface with technology, what technology does for us, and what that means in terms of how it supports the workplace. I think that's ultimately the disconnect. There's been very little conversation that I've seen, and certainly if you're online and you've seen something different, by all means hop in and post a comment or a question here. But the enterprise IT team is typically brought in late, and they have a really good idea of what needs to happen based on corporate standards. And it's very little information has been given to that team related to what the workplace is and the strategy behind it. They're just sort of moving in motion with what their corporate standards are. And I get it. I believe that with these newer spaces, it has to be something that's out of the box and completely different, or potentially you won't get the function of these spaces that you need because the technology won't support it. I felt like it was a lot of words, man. Hopefully that answered your very short question.
You know what, James? Also, I was looking at Marga's question. I don't think. Let me just address one thing she said. In other words, she's like, "How do you make sure you have a desk to work on?" Marga, I think that the trick there is to be able to understand, either through return to work surveys, or if you want to engage in predictive analytics, is to understand the likelihood of people coming back and then trying to set a ratio of people per seat. I'll give you an example. 2 people per 1 work seat is a pretty aggressive ratio, depending on what team it is. Like if it's a sales team, you might go up to 6 people per one seat. If it's a data entry, or if it's maybe engineering, you might want to temper that around like 1.2 people per 1 work seat. But you really have to get an idea of what the likelihood of people coming back to the office, and then setting a ratio there that can support that rate of people coming back in the office. I will say this though, Marga, is not every, it's beneficial to not always just count a workstation as a work point. In these more fluid propeller-like spaces, you could have, people could work in the community zone, they could work in the innovation zone if they have to sit there for maybe an hour or 2 and just knock out some work.
That was excellent, Albert. Let me go back just for a second, Albert, and sort of put in something here a little bit. I wanted to make a connection between what enterprise IT, I don't want to come down hard on enterprise IT, right? Those guys have a full plate. And just to give a sense for those on the call from a corporate real estate perspective, what that looks like, and being able to tie some of the things together. Enterprise IT certainly understands workforce enablement. That's the laptops and the cell phones and the headsets that work get done. Strangely enough, workforce enablement wasn't one of the top 3 things prior to COVID. And this study, by the way, is from KPMG, information that from one of their surveys, 2020 surveys for global CIOs, thought it very pertinent to this topic and conversation. So now that's become top of mind post-COVID on what workforce enablement means. But again, they're not thinking in terms of real estate and workplace and what that means. They're thinking more in terms of, how do I access the applications and get my production work done? And I think that's the opportunity to help align corporate real estate and enterprise IT with that trend moving forward. There's also this notion of digital transformation, and believe me, that has significantly accelerated post-COVID, because we're all working from home, we're collaborating in a digital environment. But there's also this notion of artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and automation. And that's trends that have been accelerated, just like all the other trends that we've been talking about have been accelerated because of COVID. When we think in terms of automation, and I don't want to get really deep into this, but there's a notion of robotic process automation that's looking at tasks, workflows that are very task-oriented and very repeatable, and being able to have a machine to produce those tasks or deliver upon those tasks, where you used to have a person to do that. That's one notion of automation that is definitely accelerating and moving forward. There's another concept of automation, particularly as it relates to workplace, and that's, how do I take the work, the thinking out of workplace for the occupants in the space? And intelligent building and smart building has been around since 1978. It was mostly done to reduce energy and to reduce our carbon footprint. But there's a fair amount of interesting technology in smart buildings, and it's meant for the base building. So systems are talking, they're sort of understanding each other, and based on this understanding, they're able to take autonomous action in order to do those 2 things, save energy or reduce carbon footprint. That notion is what we can now bring into the workplace. So we do have the ability to look at sensors and badge data to better understand what's happening for the occupants, and to take some of the hard work out of the workplace. So having to reconfigure the conference room by way of example, or making it easier to connect the physical and digital workplace when you're in a mixed mode collaboration space. And then lastly, software as a service is a huge thing that's taking hold. So why is that important from a corporate real estate perspective? It's that gray area, that platform, those platforms of technologies that aren't really owned by enterprise or facilities, the contact tracing applications, the room utilization applications. It's important to know that enterprise understands software as a service. Generally, what you hear if you're selling those types of services is, you can't deploy software as a service here. But in reality, that's the trend that's taking place. We're going to see a lot more of that, particularly this year moving forward, because it's so much easier to get a really good occupant experience and to add things on to software as a service. That's the marketplace software as a service piece. People will use the tools that they find productive and that they find value in. Enterprise IT now understands, and have for quite some time, that they can't really force people into using applications. That destroys productivity. They have to be pliable enough in order to be able to work with these new trends and these new platforms. So being able to tie enterprise IT and corporate real estate from a trends perspective, and to make sure they're aligned and communicating, I think speaks just also answers your question as well, Albert, as to how do we ensure that we're not overspending or spending in the wrong areas for something that seems nice at the time but won't really have value in the future.
Right.
We have about 5 minutes left, 5-10 minutes left. Final thoughts, Albert, from your perspective. What would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I think maybe two things is, a lot of our clients are coming to us right now saying, what do we do? And one of the things I think, in my opinion, is doing nothing right now is not the solution. In other words, a wait and see perspective can be dangerous, because if you don't start to anticipate the changing shifts in workforce patterns, then you're going to find yourself a year from now, when there's a vaccine, an office that is completely incompatible with your employees' needs. So I think now, between 6 to 9 months, now is the time to be bold. Now is the time to talk to folks, to talk to organizations, talk to consultants, talk to guys like me. I'm not trying to sell myself here, but figure out how can you anticipate change and how can you respond to it. Because the other thing of this, James, is this is, and everyone says this is unprecedented, but it's a unique situation in which, if you were going to do something to the workspace, you don't need swing space. You don't need to pull people out of the office and then put them back in. I think with a little bit of sophistication and a little bit of thoughtfulness, you can think of pilot and or progressive workplace strategies like Propeller that you can experiment with now, or at least think about experimenting now, because I don't actually think you're going to have this window of opportunity anytime soon to do that. The second thing I'd like to say is, I know everyone's always talking about, and I'm just kind of reinforcing what I said earlier, I know everyone's always talking about, the workplace is about interacting, doing collaboration and brainstorming and community building, and that's certainly two pieces of our Propeller model. Those are two zones of our Propeller model. But I don't want us to forget about that problem-solving piece, right? I don't necessarily think that the workplace of the future is all about simply camaraderie and connectedness, although it's a large portion of it is. There's one piece that let's not forget about, that it's sometimes difficult for folks to get into. Hold on, let me back up here for a second. Is that we took a little bit of and for anybody who's interested, I can show you sort of a sample floor plan of this. But we took a little bit of a cue from Susan Cain, who wrote a book called The Quiet Revolution. She also has a great TED Talk around this. And basically what she said, James, is introverts pretty much get a raw deal in the open workspace, because they are often the most creative minds. They often come up with the best thinking, yet the open workspace does not allow them the opportunity to actually express or articulate those opinions, because the open workspace tends to favor extroverts or those with the loudest voice. Mm-hmm. So in that problem-solving space that we're talking about, that's really what we want that space to be. It's a space that's for introverted work, where you can go back and do 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted, undistracted work that you may not be able to do at home, and to come up with some of those creative ideas, and then go into that innovation area to socialize and to shop those ideas around. Again, as I said, I often think of that innovation space more as a marketplace, where you go to shop, socialize, and iterate on ideas. The currency in that innovation space isn't money, it's ideas, where you go and exchange them. And maybe one last thing I'll say about that is, one thing that Susan Cain said in her book that really kind of struck a nerve with me is that Darwin actually did his best work, not in his cabin in his boat, or not working in some dark dank office, but actually he did his best work walking along the beach, where he grabbed inspiration. Now, I don't necessarily think that I can recreate a beach or that we can recreate a beach in the problem-solving area. But what I do think we can do is create an environment that inspires, not meditation, but inspires flow, inspires creativity, and inspires bold new thinking. So that's maybe again, that's what I'm saying is that yes, camaraderie, connectedness, teamwork, all that is super important in the new work office. In fact, I think it should take up about 2/3 of it. But let's not forget about the introverts, and let's not forget about people who actually want to go into the office to get away from it, to actually do what is ultimately some really creative work.
Man, what an amazing segue. Oh, I see Beck. Hang on, Beck. Let me, hi, Beck. I'll pull your question up here in just a second. The notion of biodigitory. It's a new word that's relatively born in the last 3 years or so. But ultimately, it's the use of technology to support health and wellness of the occupants in a space. And it really goes back to the notion of biophilia, being able to create areas of wellness that are supported with nature elements. So you think of plants in the workplace, is typically what people think of. In biodigitory, we use technology. So you can think of it as being circadian rhythm lights using LED lighting technologies in order to get intensity and color of the sun as it moves through the day to help with your natural rhythms. You can think of it as an area where, from an innovation or problem solving perspective, your team or makeup of your team might get a lot of energy from a coffee shop environment. So we can recreate that coffee shop environment in that space to bring that energy level. We can create an area of Zen, if you will, right? Using sound and lights and video to support that notion. These are things that, again, you have to really think about very early on from a workplace strategy perspective, and they're technology related. And I think I can't say it enough for the thought that I want people to get left with. It's that thinking of technology as the 27 systems that you used to think of. So AV, security, badge readers, Wi-Fi, you need all of that. The context for why you need it is vastly different. It's not a place to go that where we're going now is not a place to do productive work or production work. It's a place that needs to be far more humanistic, a place that needs to support wellness, a sense of security, needs to be very easy to use, very easy to get my work done in. And that's what you need to focus on. And that's why you need to be a little bit early. All right, Beck Johnson, I'm going to pull your thing up here, Beck. Hey, Beck. Beck's a friend of the show. She agrees with the problem solving and space opportunity alongside connected work. Thank you. So apparently we had a had a good note with Beck. Beck, by the way, does some amazing research for a furniture manufacturer. So thank you for that statement, Beck.
Hey, James, can I just double down on what you just said, though?
Of course.
Is because I think pre-COVID, when we talked about health and wellness, we talked about LEED certification, plants in the office, and a gym, right? That's
exactly.
Yeah. And right. And I think now people are understanding that this is part of, our life, right? In other words, we have to think about mental wellness. We have to think about personal wellness. We have to think about professional wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness. There are about 7 different kind of categories around wellness that aren't just subjugated or unique to an office space. Like, again, it was amazing to me sometimes when companies would say, "Oh, we're very sustainable. Look at our LEED plaque." That talks about the sustainability of the building, but it doesn't really talk about the wellness and the total breadth of what we mean by wellness for the human experience.
It means so much more, and we can do a whole show on just what that
means. I know.
But so our firm, the name Cognitive Corp, really was born for 2 reasons. How do we help a workplace become more autonomous? So cognitive functioning from that perspective.
Right.
But from an occupant perspective, how do we reinforce the different cognitive areas that people have or need to be reinforced in the workplace? And it goes back to personalities. It goes back to light stimulus and sound stimulus. And technology has the ability to support a lot of those different zones. And again, it all goes back to the strategy piece. And I know, man, we're out of time, but man, we could dive deep for 35, 40 minutes just on that.
No, this is a great conversation, James. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Let me pull up this slide fast. Here we go. Let me share my screen. I think here we go. Yep. Now, for those of you who have joined us. That's kind of weird. Something strange, but let me get this out of the way. There we go. It's a live event. This just proves it's a live event. Now, in the chat window, I'm going to post a link. So everybody should have that link in just a second. If you're not on the live event, what you can do is take out your mobile phone, point it at that QR code. It will also ask your permission to take you to this landing page. This landing page was put together with Unispace and Cognitive, and it has some additional information for you and some ability to do some independent research for the topics that we just talked about. As mentioned earlier, you also have the ability to ask questions at the bottom and submit those. It goes directly to us, and we'll definitely get back to you less than 48 hours with insights or answers to your questions. Thank you very much, Albert and team over at Unispace, and everyone who attended as well. These really are unique times, and I think it very important. It is for us very important for us to say innovation is the way forward. It's the way that we're going to get back to something that we consider the new normal. Let's just recognize it right now. It's never going to go back to the way it was. So let's make a better place or a better future for us moving forward. That said, anything else, Albert?
No, thank you, James. Enjoyed it.
That's super awesome. All right, guys. With that, have a lovely day, and we will talk.